Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I'm excited to do my second version of our 2024 Ideal Draft Prospects video. We've talked about some players before. It was much earlier in this offseason that could have fit for Jacksonville. I believe it was even before free agency. So this list, a lot of those players are still very applicable. It does need some updates, right? Because now we know what our needs are heading into the draft. We have some pretty big ones, not many, but a few of them. And we've got some error positions, I think. Would be really nice to add some players now, maybe develop them this year, and then see if you got a starter in the future. So we're going to start with a couple offensive linemen here. You'll see we're also going to talk about one later. I got Olu Fanu on the cover, or Fashanu. He's definitely going to be a fit. We'll talk about why. But the first one I'm going to hit on is Rosengard. Got to meet him at the Senior Bowl, actually. Got an autograph from him. Super cool. Didn't really talk to him much. But from watching film on Rosengard, what stands out about him is that he has some incredible movement skills for an offensive lineman. Right now, he plays tackle. He was a right tackle for the Washington Huskies. He was a pretty solid player. And there's some hype right now about him even being a second-round draft prospect. Now, I have him much lower, and I still think he's a very good player. I think that there's a lot to work with. He could be a special prospect, but what might even drive him further up the board, along with maybe just me being a little bit harsh on him, honestly, having him this low, is the fact of how well he fits Jacksonville's offense. They like to have these athletic tackles. They want to have guys who can get on the move. Rosengard has those skills. I have concerns about maybe his strength profile. The physicality is not where I want it to be. And that is a major concern, right? Because, I mean, they've literally said this offseason, like, you can't teach physicality. So maybe something's there with Rosengard, but that is my primary concern why he's so low on the list for me. He'll be one I'll probably try to watch again before the NFL draft. But Rosengard would be a really nice backup player to bring in his first year. I think this is a prospect who could even kick in the guard potentially. He doesn't have incredible measurements. They're more so fine. And so he might be a better fit kicking inside and could be someone you bring in this year. You train him up to potentially be the future right guard for the team. You know, you could even, if he's good enough, have him be the future right tackle as well. But he would be a really nice piece for Jacksonville to add in the draft this year as a backup, a swing tackle or a swing guard, whatever you want him to be this year. I think he could be versatile and play all those positions. Of course, you know, experience is a major concern with that. But long term, this guy can start in the NFL. I do believe that. In Jacksonville, as far as their offensive line, the way they've done things, the only possibility I think for them to get an immediate starter is if they get a really good tackle. Because the Cam Robinson deal, well, it looks like he's probably going to stick around. There's been no changes to it. They can still cut him right now and not pay him a dime this year. It's just the cap hit from pushing, some of those signing bonuses down the road from before. That's the only thing that would be on the cap. So they have flexibility through the draft, I'm sure. I don't think they'll restructure anything before. So they could go out and get a major player, but I don't think they're going to do that. And all the hype right now is that they're going to hit really hard on the offensive line. Ideally, maybe starting with pick 96 and going through some of those 4th and 5th round selections. So I could definitely see that. I think Rosengard would be a really nice addition, someone you can develop, and someone who could be a good starter down the road. So definitely a name to watch for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, I don't think we've met with him, and maybe I'm wrong on that. He makes a ton of sense as someone they could be interested in. Another right tackle that the Jaguars could look at is Christian Jones out of Texas. You've got to look at the future of tackle right now. You've got Walker Little, who's your swing guy. He's got one more year here. I don't see how he sticks around past this year. I just, if I'm him, just to be quite frank, I'm not staying here because I don't have the trust that they're going to even give me an opportunity to start and earn a role. Because really what he's done is he's come in, he's been the backup, he's done well when he started. He's been a starting caliber tackle in the NFL, and there's value in that. Last year, whenever they moved him to guard, he played much, much worse. And even when he went back to tackle, it was bad. So that's a concern. But I don't think he sticks around past this year. You obviously only have one more year of Cam Robinson as well. So Christian Jones would make sense to be maybe your third or fourth round pick, somewhere in there, that can be a swing tackle right off the bat, give you more flexibility there, and then potentially even be a starter down the road. That is possible. I know if it was me and I drafted him, my ideal role for him is to be a swing tackle and maybe to learn how to play guard. Because the major concern with Christian Jones is protecting the edge. He can lose sometimes to counter moves that go inside. There's some concerns there. But this guy does have a ton of starting experience. He's got really good measurables, some of the best measurables in the class, which is like really underrated. And he'd just be a good addition for any team that at least wants to get a swing tackle. It's a valuable position. You have to have a plan there. If a player goes down, I think Christian Jones could be a pretty good fit and a stronger player as well, maybe for that run game. So while I don't think he's the greatest mover and maybe not as much of a fit as Rosengard is long-term, I do think he's a little bit of a player right now because he plays with that physicality that you want to see out of this offensive line. That's somewhere that they lacked. And I think Christian Jones is a player who could bring that in. So he's a prospect I'm watching. Someone I'd be very happy to bring in. I have taken him in a lot of mock drafts for good reason. And we'll have to see where he goes. But definitely a name to watch for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, getting to a different position, still sticking with offense here, we're going to talk about Devonta Walker. So Devonta Walker, he's my 54th overall prospect. He's actually gone down a couple spots since I originally ranked him in our wide receivers episode. He is behind Piol for me now, who we'll talk about in a second. He'll be our next guy. But Devonta Walker, when I look at him as a prospect, the major concern is I do think that there's bust potential, and that's scary, especially if you're using an earlier pick on him. But I do feel comfortable taking him in the middle of day 3. I think he's a player that when you bring him in, you cannot expect him to be the wide receiver 1. He needs to be a part of an offense, not the offense. And so you look at Jacksonville, well, we really need a wide receiver 1. Getting in someone who can carve out a role and have some help from other players, that can work too. And you don't want to invest a super high pick because at some point you want to get that number 1 wide receiver, and that's going to relegate someone. So it might be a little early, but I do think as far as the fit into what you're wanting out of your final receiver that would ideally replace Zay Jones, save you $8 million over these next 2 years combined, Devonta Walker has that. They've got their slot in Christian Kirk that's very clear. They've got their X in Gabe Davis, that vertical threat that can win down the field, that can win the contested catches, make the big plays. Now what they need is speed. They need someone who's a good route runner, and Devonta Walker brings a lot of that. The main concern that people have, which you all, I'm sure, have this concern because the vast majority of draftniks do not like him for the sake that he dropped a lot of passes at the Senior Bowl. He had some drops this last year in college football. I think there's something there. I don't think he has the strongest hands in the world. But I also think that some of that is just having a bad week. Like, that happens to people. Players will have times where they're off. And I think for Walker, that came at a really bad time. But Jacksonville has still shown a lot of interest in him. He would be an ideal fit for that Z receiver role, and he would round out the receiving core pretty well. Now, of course, you want to get the best player available. And this year, you look at this coaching staff, they have not done well at the receiver position when we're talking about the NFL draft. You look at Doug Pearson's history, it's scary to look at. You look at the pick where they took Rager over Jefferson. Look at Trent Baalke. He's made one first-round wide receiver pick who is an immediate bust. His best pick outside of that, as I said before on here, was like Parker Washington. So you'd want him to get a top receiver. I don't trust him as much getting a later one, but I do think that Devonta Walker could bring some nice value because I think he's going to drop down boards just for the sake of, well, when I watched him in person, he wasn't that good. And I just don't think that's the player that he is at the end of the day. I think you put this guy into a stable situation, he's going to be a better pro than what he was, say at Senior Bowl week at the end of the year. He did not have the easiest college experience. And you look at when he was in a stable situation, he played really well for Kent State. He was a productive receiver. There was a game against Georgia where he literally looked like he was the best player on the field. This last year, he didn't get to start until halfway through the year. He was still productive, but he just wasn't fully there, right? Because he didn't have that whole year to get ready. And so I look at him as a nice, potentially high reward pick. I do think there's risk, but I think that risk is built into where you're picking him, because you're not taking him at 48. Maybe Jacksonville decides to, but that's probably not where he should go. You're probably taking this player in the middle to the late third round. So I would see a trade happening realistically if they're getting Devonta Walker. I could also just see him dropping down the board because teams don't want him after how this pre-draft process has gone. But there's a lot there. I do think he's a likable player as well, which is cool. Not the big thing, right? But I think that he would fit really well into this receiving core. And at least long term, if you do get your wide receiver one, this is a really good rotational player that can come in and have a role and be productive in that role and hopefully have a long NFL career. But of course, like I said, a little bit of bust potential. That's what's scary about it. And that's why he goes down the board for a lot of people right now. But someone I don't think has a lot of bust potential, and I think is just, at the end of the day, when I'm not being biased, the better overall receiver is Ricky Pearsall. He has a lot of experience in the slot, which is a little concerning for him playing outside, but I do think he can play that Z receiver role that we were talking about for Devonta Walker. Pearsall's got speed. He's got incredible route running. He gets open. He's a great catcher. He had arguably the best catch in college football in the past decade. When you go watch one of his games from this last year, I can't remember who they were playing, but he basically goes up in the air, catches it with one hand, gets nailed by two players at the same time, and holds on to the ball. And you'll have to watch it for yourself to understand what I mean, because I'm just understating it, trying to give any description of the play. But Pearsall is going to be someone who's going to be a consistent starter. He's going to produce for you. He's going to get open. He's going to keep the offense moving. And what we want to get a wide receiver one, well, we want to get the best of the best. If you can't get that, if something goes wrong, and it's always possible that happens, we could be in a situation where no team wants to trade down and we just get screwed. That's possible. I think Pearsall could make a ton of sense at pick number 48, because now you've got a player who's going to be a consistent producer for this offense, along with Christian Kirk, along with Evan Ingram. If you can get Gabe Davis to be somewhat consistent, you've got four good options in the receiving game. And you can make that work. We've seen teams win with those kinds of receiving cores, even going to the Super Bowl. So I think that's definitely a nice plan B option for Jacksonville. I think Pearsall would just be a very easy player to hit on, a very good value on day two, somewhere in the middle range of those selections. Hopefully late second round would be where you'd go, because maybe you can trade down, get more picks, still land your guy. We'll see, of course. He might go much earlier because he was impressive at the Senior Bowl. He was so impressive that he didn't finish the week because he was playing so well that it was like, you got nothing to gain, man. Like, you proved it. Everyone believes in you now. So I really like Ricky Pearsall. I think he's going to be a very good slot receiver or Z receiver in the NFL who can play outside, move around the formation. And you got Florida guy as well. I mean, what's more Jacksonville than drafting someone from the Florida Gators? And hopefully it's an actual hit, right? But, we missed on a guy last year in the second round who would have been a hit, who was supposed to go in the first, who I was a big fan of, in Osiris Torrance. Well, Pearsall probably won't be my top option in the second round. I do think he'd be a very good pick. He would fit the value. I have him 41st overall on my big board for good reason. He's a top 10 receiver in this class. Someone who'd be really nice to bring into Jacksonville as one of those plan B options. Now, getting onto the defensive side of the ball finally, because we've talked all offense, we've hit tackle, we've hit wide receiver. Let's talk about Renardo Green. So Renardo Green, late favorite of mine in this class, someone that I was not a fan of until pretty much just a couple weeks ago. But he's got athleticism, he's got speed, he's got good overall size. He matches a lot of these top cornerbacks, and he is a damn good press coverage cornerback. If you want your guy on day 2 that can start, that's going to be a great value in this class, that's going to fit that press coverage scheme, Renardo Green's your guy. And he might even fall deep into the 3rd round. I mean, I don't know right now. I have him at 36th overall. I know generally the consensus is that he goes a little bit before that pick 96. And I mean, probably a few selections before. It probably won't turn out that way on draft day. So I think Green is maybe a player that, while I have him ranked higher than Piol, you might be able to move farther back than him. Maybe you trade with a team like the Detroit Lions that got, I think pick 63 and 61 and 73, and then flip one of your 4th rounders, get some more selections on day 2, and Renardo Green could be the first of those. I think that'd be great value for Jacksonville, but they know what's going on more. They know more about where these players are going to go. I would imagine Green probably ends up going late 2nd round, early 3rd round. That's where I would guess right now. But I try with players that I don't really know how the NFL feels about them. I tend to go on the NFL website. I look at the scouting reports and I look at their projections because I feel like it tells you a lot about how NFL teams might be viewing these prospects. Renardo Green is one of those cornerbacks that is considered to be a plus starter at the next level. And to give context on that, when you get the plus starter grade from NFL.com, there's not many players that are getting that. So he's somewhere at the end of the day, probably in the early 2nd round as far as where his value is. So you could take him at 48. I think that'd be fine. I just think with players naturally falling, maybe you move back from that pick and try to get something there. But, you need a cornerback. You need an outside guy. If it's there, you might not move. You might just pick him and feel really happy about it, because if you're not getting one of the top guys, you're not getting an Arnold, a Mitchell, a McKinstry, Renardo Green is one of those next best options that should be available at 48 overall. So I'm a big fan. I was not familiar with his game. Now I am, and he's someone I would love to target for the Jaguars. Now, getting to the defensive line, it's a player I've been a fan of for a little bit now, Chris Jenkins Jr. I think with Chris Jenkins Jr., what's enticing about him is that when I look at this defensive line, there's a lot of pass rush upside. I think Eric Armstead, when you look at what he does, he's a pass rusher. That is his specialty. That's what he's best at. He can defend the run. I'm not saying he can't. But I think of him more as that interior player who can actually get after the quarterback, which was a huge need. Devon Hamilton right now, I think he'll be healthy. I think he'll get better next year. But I do think that you've got to try to plan to have a backup, to have a rotation. You have Tyler Lacey, which is something, and you could work with that, and he might be a really good rotational player, and you hope he's more in the long term. He was a player that they liked last year, that a lot of fans also liked. I was a fan of him too, and they end up picking him. It was a good draft pick. But I don't think that stops you if you have a player like this on the board. When you look at how much they struggled against the run at the end of last year, they could not stop Derrick Henry for their lives. And this isn't Derrick Henry from 2018 or 2019 or any of those times. It's been a while. He's been in the NFL for a long time. He's on his 2nd team now. And they just got gashed. They could not stop people. And Chris Jenkins Jr., he's going to come into the NFL as a very good run defender who did not get enough opportunities in college to rush the passer, who showed potential in that regard. He's with a great defensive line. He can rotate early on. He's going to take a lot of snaps still. We got to realize with that defensive line, your interior players, for one, they're going to be able to kick out to the edges. They can do that. And Jenkins is one of those players who can play defensive end too. You're going to have that versatility to move them around, get creative, and they're still going to be good in those roles. But these players can't be on the field all the time. You're not going to have Eric Armstead and Devon Hamilton out there for 100% of the snaps. You need a backup. or more so your third starter, really, at the end of the day, is what it ends up turning out to be. Now, he'll earn more snaps over the year. He'll probably get phased in slowly. But I think it's a really nice pick. You add him to a very good room. You put him with a defensive coordinator that knows how to develop the defensive line. Some really good players around him as well. You know, like I said about there being a very good room there. So Chris Jenkins Jr., you're talking about where does he fit in the NFL? What kind of team should he go to? Jacksonville makes a ton of sense. And I'll say it now, like, I think Chris Jenkins Jr., along with Michael Hall Jr., who we did in the first video a while back, so couldn't mention him this time. I think both of those players are going to be players that they don't get picked first round. They're there on day 2. They get taken pretty early, and they end up getting those big second contracts. You know, these are guys that might hit the $20 million mark by the end of the day. I think they have those kinds of careers, or have the potential more so to do that. Obviously, it's a massive projection. We're talking about 4 to 5 years down the road. But Chris Jenkins Jr. has that potential. We'll see where he goes, of course. It might be hard to imagine a scenario where he goes past the Los Angeles Chargers, because that's a team that might really like him. But they could also be a fan of Roman Wilson. There's some other Michigan players that could sneak into there. So we'll have to see. I'm definitely watching the Chargers when we're looking at some of these Michigan prospects, because I do think they'll go very heavy on those players, because, hey, they just won a national championship, and Jim Harbaugh is out there in Los Angeles. He's going to get some of his guys back. So I'm a big fan of Chris Jenkins Jr. I think he's a phenomenal fit for what the Jaguars want to do on that interior, and to get stronger in the trenches and be able to win against both the run and the pass. I think it's just a phenomenal addition that they could make. Now, another guy kind of do the same thing, and I think should bulk up a little bit to be that versatile defensive lineman who plays inside, kicks out to the edge. Darius Robinson. He's a damn good player. It's crazy to think that at some point in this process, we had him in the 4th round consistently. Like, it's insane. He had an incredible Senior Bowl. He showed us that he can win. He can be dominant. Like, he will consistently work his way towards the quarterback, and he'll do it against a lot of different tackles. I love the build that he has. He has some ridiculous measurements. The only major knock I have on him is honestly probably just the age. He is an older player. He's going to turn 24, I believe, during his first year. But man, that's okay. Like, if you're getting the right guy, if you're getting someone who's going to be very good, you're fine getting an older prospect. Take Devin Lloyd, for example, who, you know, some people will say, hey, he hasn't had the best career in Jacksonville. I think he's been fine. I think he's consistently improved and become a better player over time. But he was an older prospect who fell down the board. Darius Robinson could do that as well. If Jacksonville doesn't trade up for one of those receivers, say they don't get up to pick 8, pick 6, pick 9, whatever it may be, maybe they end up having that pick number 48, having some of their later selections, and they say, hey, this guy's available early day 2. Like, we could use another player on this defensive line. We don't have enough depth there, especially in the pass rush department. Let's get Darius Robinson in here. I would love that addition for Jacksonville. I think it would be a phenomenal pick for them. And I have a first-round grade on him, just like I did with Chris Jenkins Jr., but this is more of a true first-round grade. This guy has the potential to be a very special player in the NFL, to be one of the best of the best. I think when you watch his game, as far as how he's used for Missouri, you think of Chris Jones. Now, he's not going to be at that level. That's a lot to ask for, right? And if he is, that's incredible. Like, that's the top of his projection at the end of the day. But he's going to get used in that same way, where if he can bulk up a little bit, maybe put 10 pounds back on, and people need to realize, like, in 2022, he was just as productive playing on the interior. A lot of the same grades out of PFF, maybe less sacks, but that's a natural part of playing inside more. So I think you put him more as an interior defender who can kick out to edge, more so like what we were talking about with Chris Jenkins Jr., but I think Darius Robinson can do that at a high level and present a massive challenge for guards on the interior, and just a complete rotation for this defensive line when they're in those 4-3 fronts. So I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's going to be really good in the NFL. And whatever team takes him, I think they're going to be happy. If I had to guess right now, I do think he'll go to Detroit. It just feels like that's going to happen. It's his hometown. It's his home team. They're having the draft up there. It would make so much sense. And I think he's even attending. So, I mean, you could just visualize it right now taking place. Now, our next guy, we've got 3 left. We're going to talk about cornerback and KoolAid McKinney. This is a great opportunity for Jacksonville if they want to just get a layup good pick at number 17, or maybe even move back a few spots and get him. I could see Jacksonville potentially trading with, let's throw out the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that's a good one. And the reason why I say that is because I think if you move with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you could throw out Miami too, because they're at 21, you're watching for teams that could take a cornerback. And I think Philadelphia is probably top of that list, realistically. You could have a team that takes Minnesota's 23rd overall pick that wants a cornerback as well. If Minnesota stays there, they could even want McKinstry. But I think at the end of the day, you look at number 18, you look at number 19, those are going to be offensive tackle picks or more likely defensive tackle picks. And then you've got 20, where we've heard a ton of buzz about Amarius Mims. They could take a wide receiver. You're not looking at KoolAid McKinney going in those selections. And I think all of those teams probably stay put, if not move up in the draft. So McKinney might be one that you move back. You could even just be with the Rams. You could take pick 99, and you don't have to worry about Cincinnati taking McKinney there. The worst case scenario is maybe they trade out. It just happens to be a team taking McKinney at number 18. That's always possible when you move back. But I think you're relatively safe doing it for KoolAid, and you're getting a phenomenal fit that I know Ryan Nielsen's very high on. We've heard those rumors. I think they're true. He's a great press coverage cornerback. He has not been targeted much this last year because he's a proven player. And he's fallen down rankings for people because of that. Because they're like, well, I haven't seen him, have this many interceptions this year. Well, it's because no one's throwing at him. They're throwing at Terry and Arnold because Arnold had to prove something in 2023. That's the difference. They're both great prospects. So I think McKinney, while I have him at 18th overall, and of course, like that would indicate maybe it's hard for him to be the top of my board when we're picking, especially if we stay at 17, it would be impossible. But I do think that he's going to be almost identical as far as grades to the players who are available. Makes sense as a major need. I think he's a very safe player to draft in this class, and someone that if you move back to 20 or 21, you pick up another third maybe, or you maybe swap your third for a second, or you do something to improve in that range, you're feeling really good. In a very deep class going into early day 3, you've got another pick there. You got your guy in the first round who's going to fit the scheme perfectly. McKinney makes a ton of sense for Jacksonville, and he'd be a very good first-round pick. Now, getting to another fit, he was on the thumbnail, a player that I think is a perfect addition for the Jaguars, especially to help the salary cap this year and to lock down 2 of the most important positions on your offensive line, which are the bookend tackles. It's Olu Fanu. When I look at, I gotta remember, man. I always call him Fashanu. It's not Fashanu, it's Fashanu. But I'm just gonna continue to do it throughout this whole process until we don't draft him, and then you'll never have to hear it again. But Fashanu is one of the best offensive tackles in this class, and for some, he might be number 1. I think you could argue that. When you're looking at purely pass protection, I think he is the best in this class, and that's why he was ranked first overall throughout almost this entire draft process until the last couple months. The problem with Fashanu is that the run blocking, well, it improved. I have to make that very clear. It was a positive this last year. It was not some terrible aspect of his game. He was generally positive in that regard. He has improved, but he's not at the same level as a lot of these top prospects in the run game. The other thing, and what partially impacts his ability in run blocking, is that he has very small hands. They are apparently 8.5 inches. That's not great. But the thing with Fashanu His athleticism is off the charts. He's arguably the best athlete in this class. Now, as far as tackles, there's a debate there, though, because you've got even Amarius Mims, you've got Tyler Guyton, you've got other names you can throw out because there's some really gifted tackles in this class. But Fashanu is the one who's proven himself for the longest, and he's been a good prospect for a while, and I kind of wish he came out last year, personally. But it might work out for Jacksonville if they pick him. And I think you probably have to trade up to 13 to be safe. Maybe he just falls to you at 17. It kind of depends on the tackles available when New Orleans picks, because that's really the pick you got to get through to get Fashanu. I think he would just be a perfect fit. And why I think he'd be a perfect fit is you need to get a left tackle of the future or a right tackle of the future. You want someone who's athletic. You want someone who's a very good pass protector, because the vast majority of the time, we're going to be in passing sets. We're not going to be running the ball all the time. As much as I wish we did, much as I wish we made ETN into a very major part of our offense, which you could say, well, he's the running back and he's involved on like every other play almost. I don't think he's as major of a part of the offense as what he could be. So with ETN, like, I wish he was out there more, but the reality is the Jaguars don't run their offense that way. They're pass heavy. That's what they want to do. That's their concept. Fashanu fits that perfectly because that's where he's great. He has this ability that other players, I just don't see it from at the tackle position, where even when he initially loses, he knows how to recover unlike anyone I've ever watched. He will immediately, and I mean like on the spot, the moment he knows that he's losing leverage or anything, he'll kick back, he'll do a hop step, he'll do whatever he has to, he'll readjust, like he will lock it down. I don't think he's actually allowed a sack in his college career. If I remember that correctly, it's something like that. I mean, he is a great offensive tackle, and he's had one bad game in his entire career, and that was against Ohio State against some power rushers. So maybe that's a concern. The physicality can be there. It's not elite, but you look at what you need with this team, you look at the fact that he's probably going to fall on draft day. It's not a sexy pick, but it's one that's going to look really damn good for your checkbook next year and for this year. Because while I know that right now we're technically over the maximum rollover for next year, you can push money up, you can do different things, you can make a trade if you want to, you can save money on Cam Robinson's contract, flip into another team for a third or fourth round pick, whatever it ends up being. Maybe it's not even that high, right? But you get something out of him now. You've got your two starters. You're feeling really good about this offensive line for the future because you've got three positions locked down for the long term, and I mean the very long term. You got Mitch Morse, who you can start right now. You're eventually going to want that center of the future, and you're going to want a right guard for next year. You're feeling pretty good about that group for what you want to do, and hopefully on the interior after an addition like this, you can get players who have a lot of upside in run blocking. That's what I'd like to see. I think they need to focus on that, and that'd be great to have at the end of the day. But Fashanu, talking about the fit, it's as good as it gets, and he might just be a layup pick for the Jaguars at 17 that maybe people don't like it, but he's a great value there. Like, it's debatable the value there would almost be better than the top guy I got here, who you'd have to trade pretty far up for. Maybe it's only 8. I think it's probably 6 to be safe. Malik Neighbors. I think he is the best fit for the Jaguars, probably in this entire class, as far as including the upside of the player as well, and just what he is right now. You need a Z receiver. That's very clear. And you could use someone like Odunze, who I have a very high grade on. He's top 5 for me. He's a great player in this class. I got to make that clear. But Odunze is an X. That's what he is at the end of the day. You got an X. His skill set is different than Gabe Davis's skill set, but you're getting a better complementary piece in Malik Neighbors. Neighbors has some of the most special film that you watch in this class, and when you watch him, I truly believe you can understand why some people can go out and say, hey, Malik Neighbors, I have a higher grade on him than Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, now for me, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. above him, but they're 1-2 in my rankings. I think these are two players that are going to be dominant at the next level. And you look at, like I said earlier, I mean, you've heard it many times this offseason as we're talking about receiver, you don't have a front office and a coaching staff that knows how to pick him in the first round. But Malik Neighbors, you don't have bust potential there. Like, I just don't think that. The only way is if he does off the field stuff. And while they're trying to say, like, he's got character concerns and all this, like, yeah, he's made mistakes. I get that. And he's made some poor decisions at points. But I don't think those are nearly as bad as what people are saying. And I don't know if they impact his NFL career at all. I'd love it if teams just sat there and said, well, I don't know. What if this guy does something and they go pick another player and he just falls into our lap in a trade up with the Falcons? That would be incredible. It'd be potentially the best pick of the 2024 NFL draft. But talking about his game and what he offers, he's a Z receiver. He's got incredible speed. The acceleration might be the best in any prospect I've ever scouted before or I've ever watched in football. He goes from 0 to 100 in probably about a tenth of a second, it feels like on film. It is a nightmare to tackle this guy after the catch. You'd think as well, for like him being a 6-foot receiver, that it wouldn't be the end of the world trying to bring him down, like he wouldn't be super physical. That's not true. He is a super physical player with tons of speed. When you watch this film, you will see that he is consistently finding every little way as possible to create that extra yardage after the catch. He gets a little crazy with it at times. Maybe that could be a knock, but usually he doesn't take big hits doing that, so I don't think it's as big of a deal as it would be to some. Neighbors is going to be open all the time. He's going to get open down the field. He's going to convert touchdowns. He's going to get the scoring up for this offense. I think he's easily, his first year, going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. And he could have the kind of impact, or close to it, because I don't know if I could say he has the same level of impact given what Ja'Marr Chase did, but to Ja'Marr Chase. And why I say he maybe can't get to that same level is because we're talking about almost winning a Super Bowl. I mean, if Joe Burrow was able to see him down the field and get it off, like, that they're winning that game probably at the end of the day. So it's maybe not that kind of upside, but similar-ish to the sense that, like, adding a Malik Neighbors, I think, wins you the division. You do it through the draft as well. You don't spend nearly as much as the Texans, who are in a far worse financial situation long-term now because, well, they're going all in. And so you can take advantage of that, and you can win through the draft right now. You can win the AFC South. You can win playoff games, and you might be able to make it to the Super Bowl. Who knows? I think that's probably pretty lofty. I don't think this team right now is Super Bowl caliber. I think they're a little ways off. I think they've got to be more consistent through how they build through the draft, how well they pick, and not spending so much money and pushing it down the road, because there's some really big numbers. When you look at cash that's going to be against the cap down the road that's already been paid out in previous seasons, it's over 100 million most years now. So a lot of money has been pushed down, and that's a problem. But I do think that getting a player like Malik Neighbors, who's, if he's what you think he is, probably going to be, by the time he gets an extension, a $35 million a year player, you're getting that for $8 million a year for 4 years. You get a 5th-year option. Like, the value in making that pick and then trading your extra assets to move up, I think that's absolutely worth it at the end of the day. And you can get creative. That's why I'm trying to stress to people when we're talking about getting one of these receivers. I think Jacksonville needs to get creative. You know, just to throw out another idea, and some of these might not stick against the wall when you throw them, but you look at a team like the Jets that maybe they want more picks this year, and they want to go all in with Aaron Rodgers, and it's a huge year, right? Like, they got to change their trajectory. Maybe you can flip, say, your 2nd-round pick, maybe a future 3rd, throw something else in, pick up their 1st next year, because the draft value of, like, if you send those picks, it's roughly a late 1st rounder is what you're sending. You pick up their pick, which they would expect to be a late first rounder. They get more capital now in a very loaded draft class, and maybe you can flip a future first along with 17 to go move up for Malik Neighbors and get him comfortably. You can get creative, try to find a way to do it. Maybe when you ask the Jets in real life, they just say, hell no, you're stupid. That's always possible. But there's a lot of ways you can do it. Maybe it's 2 trade-ups. You can talk about moving up Denver's pick, which I don't think is super expensive. I think you could get it done for, say, 96 and 116. And then you're looking at what the Cardinals did with the Lions, which was going up from 12 to 6. They gave up, I think, 34 and 168. They got back 81. So the value was actually pretty close to giving up 48 along with 12 to get up to 6. So with the Giants very possibly being in a situation where, say your 3 quarterbacks go, Marvin Harrison Jr. goes, and then there's a lot of talk about the Chargers actually trading back, which is a little shocking because Harbaugh's just not done that throughout his career. It makes sense, though, because they probably want an offensive lineman who's going to be good in the run blocking, who's going to be strong. Maybe that's J.C. Latham. They don't want an athletic guy, a finesse guy as much as what Joe Alt is, who still has really good physicality, great player. But you could see Minnesota trading up to 5, taking McCarthy, and now the Giants are like, well, I mean, I like players here, but I'd consider moving down. Maybe I can get Brock Bowers. Darren Waller, we don't even know if he's going to start next year. He might be done. He might even be retired by the time I'm recording this. Who knows? But you can find a way, is my point, to go get Malik Neighbors without destroying your draft capital in the future of this team if you can get creative. Now, if you just look at it and you're like, oh, just throw him next year's first and that's it. Sure, you might have all your picks this year. I think you'd very much regret giving up the first next year. Not that you'd regret getting the player. I do think he'd be worth it. But there are other ways to go about it where Jacksonville can afford this and make a very good move. I hope they do that. We'll have to see what happens at the end of the day. I'm crossing my fingers that it can play out to where maybe he could even get to 8 and Jacksonville just says, we're not losing this bidding war. We're not letting anyone outbid us. What is the price? We're going to pay it. We're going to get this guy. You still get him at a discount. Now you've got your wide receiver 1 for hopefully the next decade plus. I think he's that good of a player. So there's my Malik Neighbors rant. You're going to hear more of those, I'm sure, before next Thursday. But I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's going to be incredible at the next level. There's a lot of players like that, a lot of really good fits in this class. It's not just the first round, as we talked about. There's guys in the second. There's guys in the third. Might even be guys in the fourth. We're going to see where they go, but it's going to be a really exciting draft day. There's so much smoke right now about a big trade up for a receiver. And it's not just out of Jacksonville. This is national media talking about this. These are scouts talking about this. I would say right now, and I'm not trying to get people's hopes up for nothing, but I think it's more likely that if they land Romo Dunze or Malik Neighbors rather than any other prospect in the first round, based off everything we're hearing, what players will probably go in the first 7 picks, that makes sense. So I'm really excited to see what happens. I think Jacksonville is going to have a fun first night. Hopefully they keep hitting after that, but they're going to have some damn good opportunities to improve this team drastically this year. So get excited because it's going to be a fun time next Thursday. But that's all I've got for you today. We'll have our edge rankings out hopefully tomorrow. I've got my plan set for videos. We've got, I think, including this one, 8 more, so 7 more that'll come out after this. We'll have our live stream for the first night of the draft. And then, of course, I'll keep you guys updated, my thoughts on each pick and all that. It'll be really fun. I cannot wait for the NFL draft to happen. But that's all I've got. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.